Hi everyone, welcome to Tales of Dread. Today's episode starts with a woman in Texas who finds a secret facility by accident. Then, a strange creature is seen in Michigan, and the episode ends with two sisters who saw strange blinking lights in the sky. Listen carefully to find out what the lights are. Lastly, do you know what to do? If you like what you're hearing, you know what to do. Thanks. Let's start with the stories. I haven't told anyone this before, but I'm going to now. In the 1980s, I would take the Amtrak from Houston to San Antonio once a week to see my boyfriend. According to the schedule, it left around 7 at night, and got to the San Antonio station around midnight. But you should know that Amtrak never shows up on time. In fact, sometimes we have to wait in Houston for the train for an hour or more. Sometimes we get on the train, but somewhere along the way, we have to get off because a freight train is going by or something. Sometimes I don't even know what's going on because they don't always tell the passengers. Also, when it's nighttime, they usually turn off the lights in the train so people can sleep and relax, but I never sleep. Since it's dark inside, I want to know what's going on. Most often, you can see out. I like to look at the small towns as they go by. Out the window, you never know what you'll see. Usually nothing but the backs of buildings, abandoned houses, or whatever. But every once in a while, I'll see something interesting, like looking into someone's window and getting a glimpse of their life. I don't remember what time it was, but it was dark, and we stopped in the middle of nowhere. Who can say? The track was probably being used by a freight train, and while we were waiting, I looked out the window and saw a big warehouse with a few lights on. It had a rusty chain-link fence around it with a gate in it. The warehouse was made of corrugated steel, and weeds and vines grew all the way up to the top, making it look like the roof was caving in. I thought no one was using it anymore. But then I wondered why the lights were on. Someone had to pay that electric bill for those lights to stay on. So I kept looking at it because I thought it was interesting and I wondered if anything was going on inside or if they just kept the lights on for safety. I stood there and didn't do anything. I don't know why I looked any longer. The train started moving again after a while, and just as it did, I saw a car pull up to the gate. It was dark, so it was hard to tell, but I think it was a black car. The train then left before I could even see if it went through the gate. I forgot about that warehouse until we got stuck in the same place again a few weeks later. I guess there must be something else there. This time, 4 or 5 cars were parked close to the warehouse. We stopped when, as usual, it was dark and hard to see everything, and the lights outside the warehouse didn't really light up the cars. I think people got out of their cars and went into the building. This time, it looked like the big door was open. Not all the way, but there was a crack that looked like it could let a person in. After a while, I think I got close to it, but it wasn't easy to see because of all the shadows. I wish I could have seen the people better, but it looked like some of them were wearing suits and others were wearing jumpsuits or the kind of clothes that mechanics wear. They were carrying small things in their hands, and I think they had some kind of tool to make those things. Now I was really interested, but of course the train left before anyone came back out of the building. But by this time, I was really into it, so I decided to start bringing my binoculars with me on my next few rides. I was ready with my binoculars in case the train got stuck there again, but just my luck, it didn't. We didn't stop there for weeks, and I thought they might have figured it out. I thought maybe the people in the cars knew we could see them and that we might be able to see what they were doing. But then it happened again after about 5 weeks. When the train finally stopped there, I could see at least 5 cars in front of the warehouse. A few of the cars both in front and behind had their headlights on. I quickly brought my binoculars up to my eyes and could finally see clearly. I could see that the warehouse door was open, and I watched as people got out of their cars in front. But I don't think they were all people, at least not all of them. Between two of the black suits, there was a short, grey figure with a big head that looked like it wasn't wearing anything. I don't think it was a small person, but it could have been. Its body was small, but its head was huge. So if it was a person, it must have been deformed or changed in some way, and the way they were pulling it by its feet made it look like it was dead, passed out, or sick. I watched as they dragged it into the warehouse and then followed it with two of the jumpsuits. They were doing one of the best things together when all of a sudden, the headlights went out and the warehouse lights came back on. After that, I don't think anyone else went in, but it was hard to tell. There were shadows and movement, but there was nothing near the door. Then I turned my binoculars back toward the door and watched as it closed. I wish I had been able to stay and see if anyone else came out. But when the train started moving, I didn't forget anything. I couldn't get that warehouse out of my mind. I was very curious about what was going on there. On a map, I tried to find the intersection. I even went to AAA. I tried to find where I could get one, but I couldn't find it. I didn't know where it was, and there didn't seem to be any factories near where I thought it should be. I even looked at the train route to see if the train might have been on a side rail when it stopped. Even after looking at a lot of freight rail maps, I couldn't find a solution. I looked. The place didn't seem to be there. As far as I could tell, it wasn't even close to a town. I decided that the only thing I could do was wait to find out more. We didn't stop there again for a few weeks, and when we did, I wasn't even sure it was the same place. Only because I remembered a tree with a big knot in it did I know it had to be one that was usually right by my window or at least a few feet away. The tree was still there, but now there was a wall behind it. It was one of those concrete walls that were used to block noise along the highway, and it was close to the track. And what was even scarier, was that it looked like it had always been there. I tried to see how far it went, but as far as I could see, it just kept going. I kept wondering if this was the same place. It didn't seem possible. But that tree seemed to be the same. So, we went back to that spot many times over the next few months. It was the same every time. I could only see that wall. There was nothing else. My boyfriend and I broke up in the end, and I've never been able to figure out why. I used to talk a lot about strange things that happened to me. When I was younger, I was so naive that I thought some people would believe me. Most of the time, though, they didn't. Instead, they made up excuses like it was dark outside, I was wrong or tired, etc. I decided to stop talking about it. But when I heard your show, I knew I had to tell you and your listeners about this. I'm from the top of the mitten, which is the lower peninsula of Michigan. If you understand what I mean. If you are from Detroit, you would say it is up north. There isn't much up here besides lakes and trees, but it's still pretty. And in the summer, there are a lot of tourists. It's cold in the winter. Everyone but the people who live there leave, and there aren't that many of us left. So, like most teenagers in rural areas at the time, we would go into the woods to have a bonfire. During one of these fires, something bad had happened. This was before cell phones really took off, at least up here. So when we were at the party, we couldn't talk to anyone else. Our usual place was this farmer's field that was surrounded by woods on all sides. After the farmer brought in the last harvest, the older kids told us to wait until late fall or early winter to start going there. So we knew nobody would be up there. When you were a sophomore or junior in my town, one of the seniors would let you tag along to one of their parties and show you where to go. Nobody went crazy at these events because it was too cold and we heard too many stories of kids getting lost in the snow or losing fingers to frostbite. But we always had a good time. Most people don't listen to what I say, so I'm telling you this. I was a young, scared teenager, but I wasn't crazy when it happened my sophomore year. We were having a bonfire in the field, and everything was fine. Everyone was enjoying themselves. We were burning parts of an old barn and some furniture that an old lady had left out for trash. At the time, my best friend, who I'll call Mike to protect his privacy, was grilling frozen burger patties next to me on an old, rusty charcoal grill. We stayed out there, and Sarah, whose real name we don't know, stood with us and talked like she always did. When we heard this low, rumbling growl, I looked in the direction of the sound and saw two eyes shining back at me from the edge of the firelight. I pushed Mike and Sarah and slowly pointed in the direction of the eyes, trying not to startle whatever was watching. About 10 yards separated us from the closest group of partygoers. Sarah was scared, so she slowly walked back toward them. She never looked away from the edge of the light from the fire. She didn't even look like she was breathing. I had the exact opposite reaction as she walked away. I was fascinated by her glowing eyes in the dark. In Wisconsin, we had heard for a few years that gray wolves were coming back from Canada to the Lower Peninsula, but all anyone had seen were flashes on trail cameras or tracks in the snow. Even the Fish and Game Commission couldn't decide if these were real signs of wolves or if people were just confusing dogs and coyotes. I was excited to think that I might be the first person in Lower Michigan to see a real wolf. Mike was excited, too, because he stuck close to me as I slowly moved closer to get a better look. Walking up to a possible wolf is pretty much the dumbest thing you could do. But I was young, and I could hear Sarah telling the rest of the group to keep an eye on what was going on behind me. I couldn't give up at this point. Everyone was watching, and I was a newbie. Mike and I were about 7 yards away from the supposed wolf at this point, and I could just barely make out the shape of its ears and head. It almost looked like a big German shepherd, but its nose and ears were bigger. The growling got deeper and scarier, as if it were no longer a warning but a real threat. I've heard a million dogs growl, but this one sounded more raspy and guttural, like the creature's vocal cords and chest were out of sync or that it had stopped moving and turned back. I was scared and wanted to go back, but I wanted to be the big man at the party. I wanted the older kids at the bonfire to tell the story of how this new kid became a local legend the next year. I smelled a strong smell coming from the wolf when they talked about the bonfire. It smelled like a dog that had been swimming in urine. I was maybe 5 yards away at this point, and I knew I couldn't get any closer. Also, I could now see that something was wrong. I could now see the whole shape of the creature, and it wasn't a wolf. The head and legs looked like they belonged to a large German shepherd, but the torso was human-like. It had broad, muscular shoulders and a large hump of dense muscle on its back. I fell backwards. I don't know if my foot hit a rock, a stick, or something else, but it made a noise that scared the animal. Then it stood on its back legs and growled. I'm 5'10". This thing was staring right at me. Its breath was hot and smelled awful. I fell backwards and landed on my bottom. In that position, I scrambled away as fast as I could. I tried very hard to get back to the fire as I threw handfuls of dirt and rocks at the creature. The animal ran into the woods while making this whooping, howling sound. Over the years, everyone at the party did nothing but stare at me in silence. The whole thing turned into a joke about a kid getting scared by a coyote or the farmer's dog. I've even heard that it was a raccoon that was very big for its kind. I don't blame people. If I hadn't seen it myself, I might think the same thing. Mike was the only one who was close enough to really see anything, but he won't talk about it. Every time I bring it up, he changes the subject. So I stopped bringing it up with him. Sometimes I wonder if something bad would have happened if we hadn't seen those eyes at the edge of the firelight. If someone left the party to go to the bathroom or kiss in the bushes, that could be a reason. Instead of a local joke, this could have been an unsolved murder. In any case, I guess I'm just happy that everyone is okay. I grew up on a farm in Vermont, which is in the northeast of the United States. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, so it was very remote. I knew farm work was hard because I watched my parents do it, but there were so many good things about growing up in a rural area. My older sister and I would bring snacks and a blanket outside at night to look for shooting stars. It was one of my favorite things to do. Every shooting star we saw gave us each 1 point. She was 5 years older than me, so I could never spot them as well as she did. She would try to show me where they were, but they would often be gone before I could find them on a normal night. My sister pointed up and said, "There it is." I saw it right away, and as it arced across the sky, I couldn't believe how long we could follow it. Then, out of nowhere, 3 more shooting stars shot straight toward it. But then they seemed to stop in the air, and all 4 lights changed directions at the same time and began moving together toward the south. My sister and I watched this with wide eyes, and we craned our necks to follow the lights as they moved across the sky. We looked at each other for a second or so after they were gone, and then Laura said, "I think we just saw UFOs." I was 8 years old. So I was really scared. As we got our things together and walked through the dark back to our house, I didn't say a word. We didn't tell our parents or brother what we saw because we were both confused and hoping to find a less scary explanation for the strange lights. The next day, everyone in the family got in the truck and went shopping in town. To my surprise, people at the grocery store were talking about the strange lights. When someone asked my mom if she'd seen them, she said she hadn't, but she did say that Laura and I had been looking at the stars the night before. She then asked us if we had seen any lights in the sky, and we both said no. We didn't want to answer any questions about what we had seen, and it turned out that was the right choice. There were a few articles in the paper about the lights, and people who said they were UFOs were laughed at by the rest of the town. The local radio station's morning DJs even wrote a song about the nuts. The official story was that people who saw what they thought were UFOs turned out to be military planes practicing maneuvers. We saw the lights a long time ago, but Laura brought up that night a few years ago after we had both had a few drinks. She told me that over the years that followed, she had come to believe that what we had seen were jets flying in the sky. She didn't think they were UFOs anymore. She told me about it all those years ago, and I argued with her a little bit about it, asking how she could do that to me. Because I still thought what she said to me in the end. We agreed to disagree. But to be honest, I think that even though she thinks she has talked herself out of the truth, we both know that those lights were not from this world.